Hey guys, Derek Check is here with Team Futaba, and today I want to go through and show you how to program and set up the CGY750 using the 1.4 firmware. During the video, I want to guide you through programming your radio initially, so we'll go through all of the radio prep that I do prior to actually setting up the 750. Then we're going to go and mount the unit onto my model, which will be a T-Rex 700E DFC model, and followed by that, we're going to go ahead and go through each menu step by step, explaining how to set up each parameter within the Swash Basic, Rudder Basic, Governor Basic, and S-Bus Basic menus. And we will also briefly go through the flight tuning menu as well. And hopefully after this video I'll be able to do a tuning video at the field showing you how I tune my CGY750 for my model. Okay guys, so in this first segment I want to show you how I prepare my Futaba 14SG radio to set up the CGY750. A lot of things I'm going to do in this part of the video are covered in my 14SG programming tips video, so if you haven't watched that, I would go check that out. But I'm going to just kind of quickly go through and show you what I do in the 14SG to get it ready for the CGY750. So if this was a new model, I would turn on my radio. We'd go over and create a new model here. Say, yep. We want helicopter and H1, so that's okay. I am going to be using a fastest receiver, the R7003 receiver for this helicopter, so that's okay, but you would select whichever receiver type you're using here. And now we're into our new model. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into the model menu, and we're going to go down to condition. And by default, hold is disabled, so we're going to set that up. So I like it to be on this back right switch, which is switch G. So I'm going to pick switch G. I'm going to set it to off, on, so one click will put it to on, which is what I usually use. So that's our throttle hold setup. I am going to reassign idle up 3 to switch D, and the reason for that I'll show you a little bit later. That's the next thing we're going to go to is our pitch curve menu. We're going to go to the second screen, and we are going to inhibit the 2 dials so that we don't mess up our throttle or pitch curves while we're setting up the unit. So we want to disable that in both the pitch curve and throttle. So we're in the gyro menu now, and the next area we're going to go through is just setting up your rudder and aileron and elevator gyro adjustments, since those can all be handled via the radio itself, since the CGY is integrated with the Futaba radios. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the rudder menu first. There's 2 different ways you can set up the how to control your gyro gain. So you can use the flight conditions, which is basically idle up 1, idle up 2 in normal mode, and so on. And each of those conditions, you can set an independent gain, and whether it's AVCS or normal mode. I do that for the elevator and aileron gyros, as I'm going to show you in a second, but for the rudder, I actually prefer to use the other option here, which is a switch. So if I change it to SW, I am now controlling my gyro gain settings via a switch, which I have to assign. And I prefer to do this since I tend to mostly fly in my idle up 2 head speeds, so I typically only really need to tune my tail gain for the higher head speed that I run. Now if you were running several different head speeds that are, say you have a really low head speed and then a real high head speed, your tail gain is probably going to vary quite a bit there, and you might want to use condition in that instance so that you can have an independent gain for each one of those flight conditions. Or you could still use the switch and assign it to, say, your idle up switch and control it that way. So there's a couple different options here. This is just the way I prefer to do it. So I'm going to use switch for my rudder, and I'm going to go over to here and I'm going to assign that to switch B, which is what I prefer to use. I'm going to change this to on. So I'll be in rate mode. So if we take a look here, you'll notice that as soon as I selected switch, the screen at the top here changed to active number 2, and I am on number 1. So when you use the switch mode, you can program, I believe, up to 5 different menus here and have 5 independent gains if you would wanted to. I tend to not use that feature. I tend to just have the screen number 1 and screen number 2. The important thing to notice here, though, is that even though I've assigned to switch B, if I flip switch B all the way down, this changes to active number 1. Now, when I flip the switch, it will not automatically update the lower part of the screen here. So if I go back, so active number 2 is on, I am still on the number 1 screen. So if I want to change the settings that are in effect when number 2 is active, I need to click on here, change to number 2, and now I'm on the menu that corresponds to number 2 up here. So these two numbers have to match in order for the gain and mode you have here to be affected for that screen. It does not automatically update when you flip the switch. So like if I flip down to number 1, notice I'm still on number 2 here. So keep that in mind when you're adjusting these parameters. So I am on number 2, which is my ABCS mode, which is what I want. For when the switch is all the way back, I want that to be heading hold or ABCS mode. So that's fine, and 50% gain is a reasonable starting gain, so I'm going to leave that alone. Now I'm going to change over to number 1, which again, if I flip the switch down, number 1 is active. So I'm on screen number 1 now. Now when number 1's active, I want to be in normal mode, which this so happens to be in. And I want my gain to probably be around 50% as well, which again, this happens to be in. And if yours isn't, you will want to change these two parameters to be normal and 50% for now. So that takes care of the rudder menu. Next we're going to take a look at the aileron and elevator menu. Now these, like I discussed in the gyro menu, have condition or switch as well, and I tend to leave these in condition. So I can set an independent gain for aileron and elevator gyros for each flight mode. Now the nice thing about the condition option is that as you flip through the switch and go through your different flight conditions, it will actually update the numbers right here on the top level gyro screen. So for instance, if I go back to normal mode and I change my gain to 65%, if I flip to idle up 1, or idle up 2, or idle up 1, notice how the gain went back to 50%. So it does actually update as I flip through the switch. However, the rudder gain, or rudder setting here will not. If you notice, number 1 is active on this menu. So it's telling me my rudder is in normal mode at 50% gain when number 1 is active. Now, if you recall from the earlier segment, number 1 is when the switch up here is all the way down. So right now I'm actually in position number 2, which if I go up to the top and change, you can see number 2 ABCS is active at 50%. So as you may recall from earlier in the video, we had set up idle up 3 to switch D. And the reason for this is so that we could have an independent flight mode where we could turn the aileron and elevator gyros to normal mode. And this will allow us to perform a trim flight on the CGY750. And the trim flight is pretty important to do, especially if you want to get the most level stationary pirouette that you can. So I highly recommend doing it, and when we get to the tuning video, we will go through exactly how to do it. But for now, we want to set up our idle up 3 so that the gyros are in normal mode. So if we go ahead here, we set up idle up 3 to switch D. So I can just flip to switch D, and it will go to idle up 3. And I'm going to change from ABCS to normal mode on both the aileron and elevator gyros here. And I'm going to leave the gain at 50% for now. That should be okay. We may adjust that later. One final thing I'd like to point out in the gyro menu is you can scroll through it just by tapping S1 and go through the different flight conditions. So normal, idle up 1, idle up 2, idle up 3, and hold. So this is regardless of what mode you're currently in. So if I'm at the field flying and I land and my engine's still running on my nitro model, and I want to change my idle up 2 head speed, I can just tap S1 and go to idle up 2 and make an adjustment. And this will not change the radio's flight condition as far as your model is concerned. So your helicopter isn't going to spool up because you tapped S1 and went to idle up 2. Now if you flip your switch, of course it's going to go into idle up 2. So This is a nice feature where if you're on the ground, you can just make adjustments to your idle up gains without having to shut off the model. So now we're in the governor menu of the 14SG, and if you're planning to run the internal speed controller governor, so the governor that the Castle ESCs have internal to them, or the YGE or Contronic or Scorpion or any of the other speed controllers out there that have their own internal separate governor, you do not need to do anything in this menu. You can completely ignore it. This menu is only applicable if you are using the CGY internal governor, whether it's nitro or electric. So if you're using one of those other speed controllers and their internal governor, they have a different way of setting it up that does not involve this menu. So, but if you are going to use the CGY internal governor, then we're going to go through just one or two settings in here that you need to enable. We're going to go back through it in more detail once we actually have the CGY750 on the machine. So the first thing you want to do is decide which flight modes you would like the governor to be active on. So by default, the governor is inhibited in all flight modes. So if I was running a nitro model, I tend to run the governor in every single flight condition. So I would go through and change from inhibited to act. So now normal mode, the governor is turned on. I would then change to idle up 1 and do the same thing, and so on and so forth through idle up 2, idle up 3, and whatever other modes you may want to use. So once we have that turned on, we're going to go down and change the mode from percent to one of the RPM modes here. I'd just prefer to use the RPM modes as it's easier to interpolate versus the percent mode. Now if you're running something like a multi-gov with another flybarless unit, you might use the percent mode, and then you could use this governor menu to adjust your head speed that way. But for now we're going to use the RPM mode, and on an electric model like this one, since I'm going to be using a 700, I'm going to use the 1000 to 2500 RPM range, as that's what I tend to run. There's a few different options there if this isn't in the head speed band you're looking for. And that's it for now. That setting will actually carry through to all the menus by default, so you only have to do that in one. You don't have to turn it on in every mode like the governor inhibit setting is. So that covers the governor menu for now. We'll come back to it a little bit later. With the CGY750, you can also make adjustments to your expo from within the radio, and I tend to prefer to use the same expo for all my flight modes. So to make it a little easier to program in the radio, I'm going to change in the dual rate menu here from condition to switch. And I'm not actually going to assign a switch at the bottom. So this will give me the same expo for all my flight modes. If you leave it on condition, it'll be independent. So if you make an adjustment in normal mode, your idle up 1 and idle up 2 will not be affected. So you'll have to flip through each one of the flight modes and adjust the expo independently for each one. And since I tend to use the same, I'm not going to do that. It's also important to make sure you do this for aileron, elevator, and for rudder, as each one is independent here. So if you wanted to, you could leave this and have independent ones, but we're not going to. So the next thing I'm going to go to here is the function menu. And one thing that's important is the CGY750 will never require you to use any trim on the rudder channel. So I'm going to go ahead and disable that, since I do not want to ever use my digital trim on rudder. So this way, even if I move this switch, it's not going to affect the rudder channel. So we're going to trim our tail mechanically. Since I'm going to be setting up an electric model, I might disable the trim on the throttle as well. If you're using a nitro model, obviously you want to leave this on, but since I am using an electric, I'm going to turn that for aileron and elevator. Now since we are going to do a trim flight, we're going to leave these on, but I would like to change them from separate to combined. To do that, we're going to have to find the trim menu, which is located right here as T1 through T4 set. And for T1, we're going to change that to combined for both of these guys. And that way, my trims will be identical for all flight conditions. So if I make an adjustment in normal mode, it'll be affecting my idle up 1 and idle up 2 trim settings as well. That's what combined mode does. Separate, obviously, they're independent for each flight mode. And I'm also going to change my step to 1, as I like to really be able to finely adjust my trim for these. So that pretty much concludes the 14SG radio prep section of the video. There's a few times we'll come back to this during the setup, but for the most part, those are the basic settings that I input into my 14SG before I set up the CGY750. So our next segment, we're going to go ahead and mount the CGY750 onto my model,